All right, we are now live. We've got Pat and Dean. Y'all guys have anything you want to add before I get started?
No.
We're
We
good.
follow you, man.
What's okay? Here we go. Here we go. Now we got the right guys for you. Captain Dean Thomas and Captain Pat Gardner is joining us today. Caleb is having computer issues. I think he ran it aground, and then Captain Scott is out on his lease doing some fancy stuff on that. But Captain Pat Gardner, good day for you to join us, Pat. Good day for all our listeners here listening live on the stream on YouTube. And you can subscribe there. You can subscribe to get the podcast, which we always appreciate. And you can join us on Facebook if you want to ask some questions here and there that we can add to the podcast. And don't forget, if you are listening live, you can ask some questions there. I'll pop it up on the screen, and our guys will take care of it. Some of the things we're going to cover today, we're going to do a Would You Rather. That's always fun. I think this is Pat Gardner's first foray into Would You Rather. It's always going to be fun. And then some boating stuff that Scott actually sent, even though he's not joining us this week, which is pretty impressive. And it got me thinking about our friend and loyal listener, Monique. Monique, if you're listening to the podcast, shout out to you. She went on her first solo boat trip and wanted to give credit where credit is due. Obviously, her husband or brother helping her a lot, and the podcast helping her a lot. And I commented, I said, man, you got to listen this week, because in no time you're going to be an expert on all kinds of different stuff, including maybe fixing some little issues out on the water that happen to all of us. It's not your fault. It happens to all of us. Also talking some, questions from people that are casual fishermen. Want to know about, is a boat worthwhile? Water temps. This is a good time right now to talk about water temps and more stuff as we go down the line. But I'm going to start with Pat here, because Pat, as I often say, and it's not to blow up his head, but one of the best trout fishermen that we've been around, that I've known in a long time. Pat, you're often down in Matagorda, East Matagorda. Just catch us up on what's been happening lately. Dean and I can help with the lower coast, and of course we know about connections that we talk to all the time on the upper coast. So, but what's happening right now on the middle coast? A lot of people from all over Texas go into the Matagorda, East Matagorda areas.
Yeah, the fishing's been good. It's still been kind of hit or miss. Our bigger fish haven't shown up quite as well as they usually do this time of year. Thinking just because the water temps haven't been down quite as much as they should be. When it's warm, they will slide off the bank and get in that 4.5 foot of water over shell. So some of those bigger fish that we normally are catching this time of year, the numbers of them haven't been there. We're still catching some good fish, but we're still waiting on those big ones to show up in some numbers.
Well, let's start there then. Let's move things around on the old rundown here, because Dean mentioned water temperatures. You and I spoke about this a little bit when we were out on the water this past weekend on Sunday. But the question I got is perfectly timed, talking about, is there a magic zone for every season? Now, I know in the summertime that's a whole different world, and maybe you can talk to that. But is there a magic zone? Because the fish have really started moving, especially the trout down where we are, Dean. Do you look for a specific temperature, or are you looking for variations in something going warmer or colder?
Before we jump into temperature, I want to follow up on what Pat said about depth, about where we're finding them in water depth. We are still going very shallow. I mean, we fished this week. You and I did together. I fished many days before that, and the speckled trout have been shallow. I still, we'll hit a slow spell on the flats, and I'll move to the edges, and I'll try deeper stuff, 4 to 6 feet of water. And there have been little schoolies in the deep water, but the big fish are definitely on the flats. I mean, we hooked some 24, 25, lots of 22s, you know, in that range, mixed in with a lot of dinks and 16s and 17s. So across the board on size in shallow water, and how that ties into temperature. I mean, it hasn't got cold this year. We dropped into the high 50s very short time, just for like 2 days behind that one front we had that was the most dramatic. But the water temperature has been in the middle 60s consistently throughout all of these mild fronts that we've had. So my thought process has been more about water depth than temperature to this point, which temperature will come into play over the next few weeks. But I mean, it's once that temperature drops, we'll definitely go to those edges where we're casting into 4 and 6 feet. But our best fish have been in 2 feet or water. Even when we're fishing deeper, just like you and I did the other day, the deepest water we fished was 3.
Yeah.
And they're still there.
Pat, you mentioned something off air that Perry just mentioned on the YouTube live stream. Pat, does that mean that you're primarily drifting? You said that you have not been. Now, in Matagorda, you can get some variations that are pretty significant in depth, like Dean was just talking about. That might also mean temperature, depending on what kind of, as Dean said, you know, what kind of fronts have come through or whatever. Do you think that the drifting part might be where some of those bigger trout are happening?
Yeah, definitely. And December time can be fantastic drifting. I went back and read through some of my logs over the years, and at times when, you know, we've struggled on the shoreline, particularly the south shoreline, finding big ones, when we slide off and get over that shell that's in that, you know, right when you get off those drop offs and it starts hitting that 3.5 to 4.5 foot of water, those big fish sometimes will stack out there. And it's usually during the warming trends. It's more when it gets cold, they seem to want to pull closer to the bank at times. So sometimes during those warmer trends, it can be better drifting. And no, I haven't been doing as much drifting as probably I should. I've really just been running wading trips. I was telling John before we came, you know, John and Dean, before we came on this, that I probably should get out there and do a little more drifting in the next few weeks if those bigger fish don't show up in numbers on the shoreline, because I feel like they got to be there. We caught too many big fish towards the end of the summer and even midsummer in July. You know, they got to still be there. I think they're just harder to target right now.
And then something
Go
else
ahead,
that
Dean, because I know you're thinking on this.
I would be interesting comparing with Pat where he's at. So the tide is also the third factor to this equation, where we've had really high tides in my area. We've had higher than normal tides, which makes the grass beds that we're floating over now that are 2 to 3 feet will normally be 1 foot to 18 inches on a normal tide. And then as we get into the end of December and January, we're going to have some very low tides where those are low. The ultra shallow fluctuates more temperature wise. It's colder in the morning, it's warmer in the afternoon. 4 to 6 feet of water, the drop offs is more consistent in my areas, which may mean it's a few degrees warmer in the deeper water too. But so through the last 3 weeks, which is a pretty good stretch, it has been higher than normal tide, 65-degree water, and those fish have been staying on the grass beds.
You know, the other thing, Pat, that Dane and I like this topic a lot, and we'll get into the magic zone here, the magic temp zone, if there is such a thing, in a minute. But Dane and I were talking, Pat, about you know, the afternoon bite. Like the afternoon bite has been outstanding down where we are, but those fish are somewhere in the morning, you know, and so maybe that ties in with the water temp, and maybe when it gets a certain level of warmth, they just can't resist getting into those shallows where we've been catching, you know, mid-size and smaller fish.
Yeah, I have a lot of different theories on, you know, especially when you get an afternoon bite in the dead of the winter. I think a lot of times what's driving that afternoon bite will be the water temps, and obviously those flats are going to warm up first. This time of year, when I feel like fish will eat better on, well, depending on which areas you're in, they're going to eat better on certain tides. So Whether it's falling or incoming, depending on where you're fishing, those fish like to eat on a falling tide. And I've noticed that big time, no matter what time of day it is right now. In certain areas, I have to have a falling tide to catch those fish. You're not going to catch them on the incoming. They're still there, but you got to wait for that time to turn and start falling. But like you said, as far as the afternoons go in the wintertime, I definitely think that you get on those afternoon bites. But another thing with East Matagorda Bay being 4.5 foot deep pretty much throughout the whole thing, what will push those fish a lot of times up on the banks post front is all that water in the middle gets turned over with the high winds. So it's actually going to drop faster. The temperature is going to drop all the way to the bottom. The thermal climb is going to hit all the way to the bottom, and it's going to push those fish into certain areas on the shorelines because the actual core temperature is going to be staying warmer in there. And not only that, the bait is seeking out refuge in those certain areas too. And it has to do with the bottom structure as well. But there's a lot of factors that'll play into those. I could talk about that kind of stuff for hours.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, all interesting topics. I don't think the fish have been moving that we've been fishing for, John.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're there, but just like Pat said, it's like, when do they decide to eat? Is it the tide that turns and shifts some currents around that turns them on? Because we've been getting fish in the same area. We just go through some slow spells. I mean, I know those fish are still there. You just wait them out a couple hours. And that's what, like I said earlier, in between those couple hours, I'll make short runs and I'll hit different types of terrain where I'm still going to come back to where I've been catching fish. I mean, I'm going to come back and see if they got in a better mood. But I don't, with everything being consistent for so many weeks in a row, nothing is moving those fish out of there. It's just, are they in the mood right now? And the early morning is always good. The first hour of morning, man, I'm always excited. It's like, you're going to get some bites. You're going to see some mullet or some bait fish, getting kicked around at the crack of dawn. And when the sun comes up, those bait fish have been getting attached to the bottom more than the surface. And then when the sun comes up and you can see into the water, you can see that they're still there, but you just aren't getting those bites. And then, it's got some of the best trips have been from 1 o'clock until, 3:30 in the afternoon. Has just been some really good action. So I know they're staying there. What is in their mind that makes them decide that it's time to start eating? All the variables we talk about.
Yeah, you don't know what's in their little fish brains.
Their little BB brain.
Their little BB brains. So we got time on this. Let's dig in. We can always push a couple topics back. I love this topic. Let's try to answer the question, or is it a question that can't be answered? Is there a magic zone? Let's start with right now. Then we'll hit spring and fall. Like Dean, I'm gonna start with you. Like you mentioned the water temps and how they've moved. Is there generally, now I know every year is different, but is there generally like a magic zone when you start seeing the fish start to really become more active, maybe become more prevalent in these flats? Or is that just like, dude, you just got to feel it out?
Well, now is good. I mean, now is a good zone. I don't know if I could actually say there's a magic zone. For each zone, you have a way of attacking it. You have a way of approaching it. Right now, I'm still going to approach it on the shallows where, kind of where we fish most of the year. But whenever it drops down in the 50s, if the water temperature gets to 55 degrees consistently, then it's magic for other areas. Right now, the zone that we're in is the magic zone for the grass beds and the sand holes that are close to the intercoastal, that are still adjacent to deep water, but shallow. And then in January, whether you want to call it magic or not, you deal with that zone, with that temperature. And then when we talk about the mild temperatures now, but when we're in the heat of summer, when the water temperature is 90 plus degrees, you're going to approach it in a different way and still manage to find some fish. So which one is magic is kind of hard to say. If I was going to pick my favorite, it's where we're at right now, somewhere between 60 and 65 degrees.
Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and like he said, that's the interesting thing about fishing is we all have so many different ways to fish. There's so many different ways to target them. Each number can kind of be a magical number in the sense of temperature, depending on what you're doing, because they're going to be in certain areas. Me particularly, if I go back and look at what my phenomenals days have been over the last 10 years, I love the 50 to 53 degrees water, which is cold for down there, right? But it'll stack our fish down here in the better ones in more predictable areas. So when you can get down in that low to mid 50s, that kind of seems to be my magical number to really have some incredible days. And I'm strictly talking really big fish too, as well.
Yeah.
To go out and catch numbers right now, like you can go out and just wear out trout, keeper trout, like in a lot of different areas. And that's just not really what I've been doing or really what I focus on doing. Like, yeah, the fishing's great right now if you're just trying to go, get a few in the cooler or have a bunch of tugs. I'm more so talking about the upper class fish, really being able to target them and predict them and know where they're going to be at. I like the low 50s.
It's interesting. One thing, Dane, we haven't seen a lot of redfish. I mean, and that to me was fascinating. We are on redfish flats, redfish heaven. Well, are you really?
Yeah, they're everywhere in East Bay right now. I think we got more redfish in the bay than we've ever had, honestly. I mean,
and a very interesting turn of events for us. We're catching 40 trout to 2 redfish. And
literally on Sunday, we were about 30 and 2.
Where it would normally be exactly the opposite. But that's one of the mysteries that surround us out there, man. And so in the 1st of December, the first week where we're at, is normally when we get, mega schools of reds that look like a herd of buffaloes going across the flats. You can just see the wakes. When you find them, you can follow them, you can stay on them. You'll find an area that they just want to be there, where you can cast into a school, catch 2 at a time, blow the school up, and they'll come back and gather in that spot. Like they just want to be there no matter how much you terrorize them. In the summertime, you see groups in schools like that. You hit them and you can watch those wakes go straight, just leave, just vacate the scene. So, but the big schools of reds, I haven't found them. I mean, I haven't run over them. The redfish that we're catching are still kind of singled out, maybe 3 or 5 together. But, I haven't heard a lot of reports in my neighborhood of people spotting big schools where they're fairly consistent. But, it can be plus or minus a few weeks. It may be a little bit later when those things start to happen. Every year has its has a rhythm to it. And so as long as those speckled trout keep biting the way they are,
I'm not complaining.
I'm not too.
I mean, speaking of redfish, one of my good customers, Jason, shout out Jason. He was with me on Sunday, and we were running out first thing in the morning. We left super early because we were trying to get in 1 or 2 spots, and it was glass calm, and you could just barely start seeing. And from like 100 yards away, I could see probably like the size of a large living room, like ripples on the water. I'm like, man, what? Something's going on over there. I was like, no ducks just took off or whatever. And I mean, we're in the middle of the bay, middle of nowhere, and we just keep running. I run over that water, look down, and it was just orange as far as you could see. The bay was real clean. I mean, just a massive school of redfish out there in the middle of the bay. I don't know how many redfish were in that school.
Real good news, because a lot of people been targeting reds ever since the freeze, and now you got them like that. That's got to be kind of comforting to know, and because how much I fished East Matagorda, and that's something that hadn't happened in a long time.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's talk about while we're on the topic of temperatures, and we'll get to these other topics, I promise. But my brain starts going when I get on these little tangents. Then we start talking about, working baits. And this is something that we've talked about on the podcast. I am lockstep in agreement with Caleb on this one. He's not a big fan. I'm going to you first here on this one, Pat. He's not a big fan of, real slow. Start working it slow because, the water temperature is dropping. And I'm talking now more January, February, when they get a little colder. I'm with him on that. But I'm curious, like, is there any point where, and maybe we're back to the magic number thing, where you do start to maybe work your baits and your lures a little slower?
I'll pretty much start it out the same almost every time I'm fishing. And it's not necessarily fast. It's not necessarily slow. This time of year, I'm probably throwing a fat boy, either a sinker or a floater or a soft dine. But a lot of times I'm going to let the situation dictate my bait, like as far as what the bait in the area is doing. If you see mullet on the surface and they're super active, being skittish, moving really fast, and I'll speed that bait up. But if you're in an area, there's not much bait, the ones you're seeing are just maybe barely flipping or not even really seeing much at all. You can tell everything's just slower, then I'll really slow it down. But that it's more so just a feel thing. Once you're in there, you just start playing with it and figure out what what you're getting bites on. The other day, I couldn't get any bites working fast. And even slowing down a corky, I couldn't get any bites. So I put on a tail, a big gambler or a big Wiggalo by Kelly Wiggler, and just barely work it over the bottom, almost like a slow reel with some twitches in it. And they were nailing it. So,
and that I couldn't agree more with what he said. The explanation of that. We've been hitting everything on paddle tails. And this is going to kind of follow up on the paddle tail and then the rat tail conversation. Hopefully we get to that too, because
we will.
It definitely relates to the fish I've been catching the last couple of weeks. It has been all paddle tails, and we have been seeing mullet, and they've been relative early. We see them once the sun comes up, they're still there. And you can see them as you're drifting, looking down into the water, but everything has wanted a paddle tail swimming right under the surface, to where you're retrieving it, you're rolling it in, and you'll see it ripple the surface every once in a while. And then you just slow it down maybe 6 inches, and that thing ripples the surface, drops down, boom, you see the swirl behind it. You'll see the fish. I mean, it has been so close to the surface, you'll see the hit, you'll see the miss. If they come up and follow it, they'll put a big swirl, and then you give it a couple, 3 or 4 more wraps and let it sink about 6 inches. Boom, they come back and get it. And I don't know if it's the same fish coming to get it. I've had this conversation a lot. Or if there's 2 or 3 of them together, and then another fish that's with them comes back. Because we've had a lot of missed strikes that get hit.
Dude, how about that one came back 4 times?
Yeah,
until I finally
then it moves 10 feet, it gets hit again, and you think you missed them, and then 10 feet, boom, and then it finally gets eaten. But it has been a fast retrieve, and I don't, there's a balance in between that. It's not ultra fast, but it's definitely not ticking the grass. Whenever it gets colder, what I tell people all the time, I said, if you're feeling the bottom, if you're snagging every once in a while, you're doing it right. And once we get into January, when it does get much colder, if you're not ticking the bottom, you're not going to get a hit. I mean, and then those bites are real subtle. It just kind of stops moving. The fish that we're catching right now are, man, you got a hit whenever they eat it.
Yeah. And by the way, when Pat says it's not that fast, I've fished with him hundreds of times probably by now. It's fast. Pat works his bait like slow for him is fast for me, because he starts going on that thing. Hey, it works.
John, what would you call what we were doing this week? Well, how would you classify
what you and I were doing?
Yeah,
it was crazy. I was actually working it too slow. I kept having to catch myself to work it faster because I kept getting caught up in the grass too much. I was it was just frustrating. And I was like, well, man, I guess I got to work it faster. And I would go faster, and then you'd get a hit. And I keep I'm generally, like, I guess, medium, like I work my bait pretty quick when I'm jigging it. In this case, we were just reeling, and I guess I was just reeling too slow, and I kept having to tell myself faster, faster. Even when I told myself to go faster, it was still too slow. It was wild, man. It had to be like right over the grass, like just right on top of the grass. It was pretty wild.
And another variation to that is we're fishing with the exposed hooks, with the jig head, with the hook out. Whenever I really slow it down, I go to a weedless rig where the point is tucked up against the plastic, and you can set it in the grass and you can pick it up. The jig heads that we're throwing now, the 1/8 ounce, if you stop, I mean, you come in with the salad on the hook. I mean, that's all you're going to catch. But when it's time to really slow it down and touch the bottom, I go with a weedless rig, and that has not been necessary.
And that's another difference, Pat, between where we were fishing and where I like to fish also in East Matagorda. After 2 casts, I turned to Dean. I said, I got to get a lighter jig head. I mean, I could tell right away because I wasn't in Matagorda anymore, where you want to bounce it off of the oyster shell a little bit and have it popping over that thing. You wanted it just hovering. I threw twice, and I said, okay, this is way too heavy. And I think it was like 3/8. It might have been, I don't know, it might have been a quarter, whatever. I don't know. And I went to an 1/8, and it was just like magic.
Yep.
And so where you are, maybe a little heavier to stay there.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll play with it too, just depending on where those fish are at in the water column. Sometimes they want it a super light jig head, but you got to work it on the bottom. So it's super, super, super slow, so you're just barely working that bait because you want it in the lower water column, but they don't want it jumping. Like if you put a quarter on and you're working the bottom, it's going to come down and come up a lot harder, to where if you put a 16th on, when you come up, it's going to flutter like that. And a lot of times that can be the difference in catching them and not catching them, just switching between a quarter and an 1/8 and a 16th.
Yeah, and that also speaks to something that we like to tell all our listeners all the time. Swallow your pride a little bit, and if you got 2 other guys on the boat, kind of see what's working. Fortunately, I figured it out right away. But had I not, I would have realized after Dean caught 5 fish and I caught 0. Oh, you know what? He's probably throwing a lighter jig head. Go ahead, Dean.
But another interesting thought on that: there's a difference between jigging it, where it is up and down in the water, and then swimming it, where it doesn't have so much up and down action.
For sure.
I have everybody that has fished with me. That's what I tell them. I said, because everybody has I mean, it's hard to generalize everybody, but a lot of people, when they have that plastic, they want to jig it, they want to pop it. And it has been a much more steady retrieve that has been getting the strikes. And as it does get colder and we fish deeper water, it is very much jigging. You want it to come up and drop down. It's the up and down. And when that thing goes up and drops, most times you're going to get the hit on the drop. You get their attention, it slows down, boom, it's in their face and they're going to get hit. So the weight of your jig head is going to seriously affect. But the paddle tail, especially what we've been doing with 1/8 ounce jig heads, they don't go up and down real fast. Even when you stop retrieving, it is going to sink very slow. And when you start retrieving again, it's going to be still up in the column, just 6 inches or a foot under the surface, with a relatively slow retrieve still.
And that's actually kind of how our fish have been acting too lately. I haven't been necessarily jigging it, popping it off the bottom. It's been more of a reel with the drag. You know how you'll be reeling and then kind of drag it. So it's swimming and it'll kind of come up just a little bit, and you're just kind of letting it stay like that. It's not a jumping. Yep. It's more of just a swim with a little bit of a drag like that.
That's very much the game we have been playing. And until the weather changes, or these fish just completely evacuate the scene, that's probably going to be the game. And I mean, there's nothing dramatic coming in the weather for quite a few days.
Yep.
Good. Good. All right, let's get to we're going to get to Would You Rather after this one, but I thought this was a really interesting point that Scott made. He texted this to me. He might have texted it to all of us. I think a lot of our listeners are going to benefit from this because I've got a couple of thoughts, but you guys I know probably have a lot more. And I'm talking about ingenious ways to fix on water issues. I mentioned Monique earlier, and I said you got to listen to this part. So I want to get to it. So Scott said he heard the best tip he's ever heard in a long time. We all are going to have some issues on the water. Hell, you guys know I busted my prop the other day. Not a lot you can do about that. But there are some things that you can do stuff about. He said a guy was way offshore and he had a bunch of Y's on way. So way offshore, and his water pump went out. And Cito couldn't get there for several hours. So he hooked his raw water wash down to the hose port on his motor and drove 2.5 hours back, just kind of going nice and easy. So this is something I'd never even heard of. Scott is a better expert on this than I am, and he said he'd never heard of. But it got me thinking about like several different things that I've done, that you guys have done. Like I said, when all else fails, you just improvise. And the first one is an obvious one, that when you're kind of in that panic, Dean. Well, first of all, you give me before I get into specifics, you give me some of the little. Is it politically correct to say jerry rig? No. I don't know. Things that you've done.
The best one I ever did, it was many years ago. It was
before, look at you, you're proud. I can see it on your face. You're really proud.
I had power steering, like hydraulic steering, whenever I still had cables on the motor. One of the cables broke. So I put 2 ropes on the motor and ran the ropes through the cleats on the back of the boat. And you pull right, boat goes right, pull left, and actually steered the boat with 2 ropes tied to the motor. But with hydraulic steering, which is pretty much, the hydraulic steering is universal now, but hydraulic steering can go out. You can blow a seal, you can blow a seal in the helm, things can go wrong. But in that situation, it turns one direction and doesn't come back. That's when you better hope your troll motor is very well charged.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Pat.
I'm trying to think of some good ones. I've done that as well on an old whaler. We did that out in the middle of East Galveston Bay many years ago now. And I know I wish my dad was on this conversation. He's done some wild things to get.
Oh, your dad he's like MacGyver,
in like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
and
he's
my
like MacGyver out there.
Uncle. Yeah, they've done some
back
wild
in the day.
stuff,
You carried extra props. You carried a toolbox. And you know, the pins used to shear for whatever reason. I don't know what kind of magic they're putting in them pins now, but I haven't sheared a pin since I don't remember. But yeah, but now you have the backup, man, with your phone in your hand, and safety or assistance is always a phone call away.
And back in the day, the engines were they were just engines at that point, right? You could bust the cowling off and figure something out if you had to. Nowadays, I mean, it's so computerized. Like you take the cowling off of my motor now, I'm like, well, I don't know where to start. So like a lot of that stuff has gone away, but definitely always carry an extra prop in case you spin.
I said this the other day. I had an aluminum one. Always extra one. I don't have it now because of the phone, as Dean was talking about. But aluminum props are cheaper. They're easy to replace. So that's one tip that I have. But 2 things came to mind for me while y'all are thinking on this. One recently, probably not even a year ago, I'm driving. I think I was in Matagorda actually. I was driving in Matagorda, and all of a sudden, you know how you always check, to see, the telltale. Make sure your boat's peeing and all that. And I turned around as I launched, and it wasn't peeing. And I was like, oh, crap. And I looked again, and it wasn't peeing. And I looked again. I was like, well, so I stopped the motor. I looked at everything. I took the cowling off, all that stuff. I'm like, well, crap. I guess that's the day for me. And it was early in my trip. And I just started looking, and it wasn't really overheating. The temperature wasn't going up, and I was just puttering. So I took the cowling off again. And the little hose that connects from the motor, from the little pee hole to where the water, comes out, had just come off. Like there was a little wrap there, however they tied it on there, had just come off. So it was peeing in the motor. It was still peeing. So I'm like, oh, okay. So just things to look at. So I took it out, got a tie wrap, put it back on. Boom, I'm fishing all day. That's one where, you just looking at it sometimes can help you. And then the other one, I want to get your thoughts on this, is it always comes down to a battery or electrical, right? And sometimes, you turn that key and it's the worst feeling in the world. You're like, oh, crap. Not 9 times out of 10, but a lot of times, just tighten those bolts, baby. Just tighten those bolts. That was the other one that happened to me about a year ago. Just click, click, click. And for some reason, it was loose enough. The bolt was on there on the battery, but it just was loose enough that it wasn't getting the kick. So I just tightened that. But those are just two easy ones that you might want to look at. What else you got there, Dean?
And all that comes down to maintenance. You know, you want to monitor those things. Here's one that y'all may or may not have heard of. It was new to me. I learned it maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So it wasn't peeing water out of the motor, and it was actually overheating. So something was stopped up. And I got a lot of mechanic friends of mine. I don't even remember who told me this, but a can of air, like the can that you use to clean your computer, that just blows the dust off your computer. It's got the red tube on it, like a little oil can. You can take a can of air and run that tube up into the pee hole and blast it, and it will clean it out backwards. It will actually blow air. So you can have some gravel or some sand that clogs that up. And I took that can of air, put it up in there, blasted it, and it solved the problem immediately. Boom, steady stream coming out, and solved that overheating problem for like a $6 can of air. So I keep a can in my boat to this day. I keep it in the cooler but you know, where we're at, you're constantly running in the shallows and you're sucking crap up in the motor.
Yep.
And that solved that problem without a major teardown or a new water pump. I couldn't believe it worked.
Yeah, I've done something similar to that actually in the past year. I wasn't peeing and I sucked in, I guess, a little piece of gravel, some moisture, and it actually happened too down in Mansfield with grass. And what I did was took some 50-pound thicker mono, and gone back through the hole and pushed it all the way through my engine and actually unclogged it that way too, which the air sounds way better probably than sticking that.
Well, let me tell you what,
all the way down there.
Too. I have done that also. I've run a heavy leader line backwards through it and unclogged like a little Roto-Rooter.
Yeah.
Let me tell y'all something. I didn't plan on talking about popping corks today. But if you open the leaning post on my boat right now, Dean, my boat's at your house right now. If you go in there and open the leaning post, you're going to see that titanium wire from an old popping cork, because it's about 6 or 8 inches long. And I clipped the end, took all the stuff off, the cork and everything else. And I keep that in my leaning post for that reason, because those pee holes are tiny. People don't realize that if you haven't looked. They're really, really small. So that real strong, heavy wire, if you stick it in there, it'll clean it up like a champ. And because sometimes the mono will even be flexible and stuff. Yeah. So there you go, Dean. You need at least one popping cork on your boat. You will do
anything to promote popping cork
philosophy. Dude, it works like a champ because it's hard.
I get it. No, it's that braided stuff. It's flexible, and it's the same principle. But yes.
I dare you to go look in the leaning post right now. You're like, why is that wire there? Well, now you know.
It's a little the mini plumber.
The mini plumber. Anything else to help our listeners? Like when all else fails, improvise. Any other stories come in? Mine, if it's bad, I generally just make a call. But go ahead, Pat.
I did save the day one time. This was actually in East Bay as well. I had bought it from Jim Jerome, one of your good buddies too, John.
Yeah.
Shout out to him. He hooked me up so fat out of college. I didn't have any business buying a boat, and he gave me the greatest deal ever on that 2008 Explorer. But one of the first trips going out, you had a main hose coming out the back going to your live well pump to pump in there. Well, that sucker had dry rotted, and we're out in the middle of East Galveston drifting, and I'm noticing the back end of the boat is just getting lower and lower. I'm like, man, what the heck's going on? I open that hatch, and water is rushing in, and I instantly freak out, panic. I'm like, somebody get behind the wheel. We got to get moving a little bit, trying to get some of this water out so I can see where it's coming from. So we get going just a little bit, and I see that hose had dry rotted and completely cracked. And so, a hole about this big of water just pouring into my boat. So luckily I had some zip ties. Zip ties is another good thing to always have on your boat. You can use them in a lot of different ways, but I cut that hose down, shoved it back on there, and was able to zip tie it up, and saved a disaster. You know, if I would have waited maybe just a few more minutes, I don't know if we would have been able to save it.
So our buddy Drew,
go ahead, Dean.
In the slip next to me, Drew, we were talking to just the other morning, he had the exact same thing happen on his boat. But it was the plastic housing on the motor that filled up the live well had cracked. And so he's out there drifting, and all of a sudden he notices the back of his boat is riding lower than normal, opens the hatch full to the top, and he got it cranked up, got it running. He actually went and beached it so he could work on it there. And which Drew, he's a boat mechanic by trade, so he's pretty nifty with the tools. And he disconnected that whole thing and had a drain plug that he could stick in from the inside and plug it off. But this, you know, whenever my troll motor burned up earlier in the summer,
I was just going to ask you about that.
So you're the battery loose. It just comes to, you got to know your boat, man. If those things could turn horrible if you're not familiar with your boat. So new boat owners, open those hatches, look around, know where your breaker switches are to kill the electricity if something shorts out, where you can get to that thing within seconds instead of having to look for the fire extinguisher, because that's going to be your next choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, be familiar with the hoses, the connections, the breakers. You just got to know that stuff. And I tell people all the time, if you're going to be a boat owner, you're going to be a boat mechanic.
Yeah, you are.
It's
or at least a MacGyver kind of guy.
So a can of air, a popping cork, and some zippy ties.
And fuses.
You can fix
I keep fuses on. You can pretty much do anything, and a little adjustable wrench for sure. But it matters, man. So yeah, we've all been there, and we'll probably be there again. All right. Would you rather? So this is we like to play these little games because I think it you can also learn a lot from them, given the topics, or just for fun. So this is all things being equal. Like you can't determine, where you're fishing, what the bait is doing, what the tide is doing. I'm going to start with the one we mentioned a little bit earlier. So you're on the boat and you can only pick one. Would you rather pick a paddle tail or a rat tail? Go ahead, Pat.
Oh, man.
You can only pick one.
Yeah, I know it's so situational because during certain times of the year, I'm going to for sure say paddle tail. And during other times of the year, I'm going to for sure say rat tail. Oh,
that's the same reaction I had when I read it.
Yeah.
I will say this. I'm really heavy into paddle tails because they're easier. They seem to just bring more action. But man, rat tails, especially when and again, now I'm doing what I said you can't do, especially like when the shrimp are really, kind of popping on the shorelines. For some reason, I've got a shrimp colored rat tail bait that I love. Golly, but you can only pick one, and you can't determine the situation.
I think I'm gonna, if you would have asked me this several years ago, I would have said rat tail for sure, because I didn't even throw many paddle tails, but I've been throwing more paddle tails situationally lately, and they overlap in too many scenarios. So I guess I'd have to go with a paddle tail.
And that's exactly what I would say. It does overlap more. You can jig a paddle tail, but you can't really swim a rat tail.
Yeah. Versatility.
So if I had no choice, if there was no other choice in the world, I would have to lean towards paddle tail. But it is very situational. That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. All right.
Yeah.
So you're going to fish the jetties. Again, you did just jetties. You can't tell any of the circumstance or what's happening on the water, etc. Middle of the jetties or end of the jetties? Dean, you start this one.
Man, who thinks of these questions? Man,
Yours truly, man. This is why I get paid nothing.
I would probably, I'd probably say the middle. The end can be challenging, probably more often with the wind and the current and other times. And the middle offers a little more opportunity, a little more space. So I would say the middle if I had no other choice.
Pat?
I have so little time at the jetties that this is probably not a question for me. Our jetties are so small in Matagorda. When they're there, they're there. But yeah, I'd have to go middle too, just strictly from the sense of weather conditions, wind, and everything else. I do love the end of our jetties, but you could be limited as far as conditions go. So yeah, I guess I'd have to pick the middle.
I'm going to say the end. I'm going to say the end of the jetties. And I know I don't like to
what happened if it's blowing 20 out of the south.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. I don't like to get beat up like that either. But if I'm at the jetties, I'm just going to assume I could deal with the weather. And it just seems like there's just such an assortment: small fish, big fish, trout, on the rock, sheep's head, all at the end of the jetties. I'm gonna say end of the jetties there. But yeah, if it's blowing 20 and I don't have control of that, yeah, I made a wrong decision. I made a very, very bad decision. All right, so some of these are fun, as I mentioned, and don't ask me what goes through my mind when I think of these, but I thought of this. Would you rather go, Dean? You're first.
Yeah.
Would you rather go 3 months without fishing or 1 month without sexy time?
I fish a lot.
I think I know.
3 months is a long time though, but a month is a long time also.
Yeah.
And I'm still in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, you are.
So, God dang, I'm gonna pass.
No, you can't pass on this. The people want to know, and Carrie listens.
3 months of fishing.
No fishing for 3 months.
I'd skip 3 months of fishing.
Oh, you suck up. You suck up.
Yeah, I'm opposite. I thought it was clear cut. I ain't going 3 months without fishing.
Hey, Dean, you can send this to Jan. I ain't going 3 months without fishing. It ain't happening. And the thing is, she'll probably be relieved.
These are tough today, man.
Yeah, they are. All right, so you're going to take, let's say, a kids trip, because we all like to fish with artificial baits, but we also fish with bait, whether kids trip or somebody wants to use it or whatever. Cut bait or live shrimp, Pat?
Ooh. I'm going for all species. I'm going live shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do like cut mullet. I'm going live shrimp.
In my area, well, where I'm at,
I'll skip 3 months in the summer. And you can't. I said all things being equal, you can't pick the months. That's what Scott does. Scott always tries to find a little loophole in there. That's hilarious. All right, so cut bait or live shrimp, Dean?
Man, the piggies just dominate shrimp around here. I mean, I don't know if I go with cut mullet, big chunks of mullet, so they survive the piggy assault and they last long enough for the big fish to find it. The shrimp most of the year in my area, I mean, as soon as a shrimp hits the water, it's 10 seconds, it's over and it's done. But I guess I can't go Scott Null and choose my situation on these questions. If it's the winter, of course, shrimp are great. They last longer and they get hit pretty good. But if I had to pick one, it'd be the cut mullet.
All right, we've got a couple more here. Go wading barefoot or fish offshore in 10-foot swells?
I'm barefoot all day. I had to do it over the summer one day with customers. I was hired
What's
by.
wrong with you?
Well, listen to this. So I was hired to fish a tournament over the summer, and day one of the tournament, I already been fishing with them for 2 days before this, and somehow my boots got left on the dock. So I waited the whole day barefooted. So yeah, I'm definitely going wade footing
God,
or
you're
wade fishing
crazy.
barefoot.
That's what they call young and dumb, Dean.
How big did you say those waves are? The waves? How big are the waves?
We can make it 8 foot. I said 10-foot swells, but let's make it 8 foot.
I'm walking barefooted, and I do. I mean, I do step out of the boat barefooted. I do it a lot more in the kayak because I kick my shoes off anyway because I'm comfortable, and then I will jump out and walk around. But it's not it's not for the first timer. You got to know how to walk, where you're walking, and be aware. Because if you jump out of there barefooted, unaware, it's not a good situation. But if you do have an understanding of what's down there and how to move around compared to 10-foot waves offshore, I'm gonna be at the house with some Netflix on or something.
I can't tell you. I'm gonna say wade barefoot as well. I can't tell you how much I hate the idea of getting hit by a stingray. Like to me, I've seen it. Scott's been hit. It's god awful. I mean, it is god awful. And but I still. That being said, I'd probably still. Yeah, go ahead.
For all the years I've been fishing, I've never had somebody on my boat get hit, and I've had 3 on my boat in the last 2 years get hit, and one hit really bad, infected, got cut open all the way to his knee, like horrible. And I've kicked a million of them. I mean, I guess it's only a matter of time till we all get hit.
Scares the hell out of me, man.
Much time in the water, but I'm pretty good at shuffling my feet. I mean, I usually do not pick my boots up off the ground.
Yeah, I shuffle like a mofo. By the way, this ties in with our earlier topic of kind of when all else fails, improvise. Anybody who does get hit, and Scott was talking about this too. If you keep a rag, towel on your boat, and somebody gets hit, wet that towel on the hot water coming out of your motor, because that will kind of help ease the pain until you get back to dock.
Or keep a bucket and fill your bucket up with that water.
Yeah.
And it might make you think it feels better a little bit, but if like stingray wounds that go to the emergency room, they put the rag in the microwave to where it is so hot, they pick it up with tongs and put it on there to counteract the pain on that. But I mean, that's a bad situation. I've seen it happen. Just like Pat said, I have kicked more than I care to remember. And every time it is a horrible feeling. But the best advice I give anybody about that is don't back up. The ones that have gotten hit are setting the hook and they're walking backwards on the hook set, or they just have this movement that takes them backwards. Never walk in your mud trail. Never back up. They're everywhere. It's always an issue. But the ones that seem to get it are backing up in their path they just walked in. But I don't think none of that
will follow you. All that stuff you're kicking up. But actually, both of mine were in areas of scattered shell and mud, and you kick a shell clump and then pick your foot up to catch yourself, and they land in an area of mud in between, and boom. So when you're in those areas of scattered shell, make sure you're going slow enough to where when you kick a shell, you can bring your foot up on top of that shell and then slide it back down on the other side, and you're not lifting up. If you're walking too fast and you kick one, then you try and bring your foot up fast and you set down.
You're on it.
Yeah, boom. Like you're hit.
By the way, all 3 of your guys okay? Got taken care of?
Yeah. Yeah, all right.
Delaney mentions here, and this is another thing maybe to put in your toolbox. I used to have some on my boat. I don't think I have any right now, but I need to change that. Hand warmers, like those snap hand warmers or regular other types of hand warmers, just in case, because that is really a bad
I
thing.
actually saw
Last
some.
one- Go
I
ahead.
saw some giant ones, some giant hand warmers.
Oh, yeah?
Actually, they would actually like wrap around your legs. So, never really thought of it, but yeah, good tip there.
Yeah, I used to keep some on the boat. All right, one more here. Would you rather throw the same top water all day? Again, you can't determine the situation. Throw the same top water all day or the same plastic? Dean?
Man, I'm a topwateraholic. I mean, I catch a lot of fish on topwater, so I would throw topwaters if
Pat?
Yeah, give me the top water.
I got to agree with you guys. I love plastics. They're so versatile, but if I'm going to be throwing the same bait all day, I want to make sure I can see some blowups at least.
If it came down to like if the question was more towards just trying to catch fish, then I would say a soft plastic. But as somebody that gets to fish like we do all the time, I don't even really care a lot of times if I'm going out and don't get a bite, because I'm usually looking for the fish. And so yeah, I'm going top water.
One from the studio audience here on the live YouTube stream as we're recording. There's no laugh track here. It's a live studio audience from Chris. Would you rather fish with Caleb in a tower boat or poling skiff with Scott? Pat?
Oh man, both are sound like a great time. But I'm not much of the fly fish guy, so I'm gonna go in tower boat. But I mean, I'd go fish with either one of them clowns for sure.
For me, what it comes down to is who could I listen to all day? It's not the mode of transportation. And Scott can wear me out, man. He's
and Caleb can't.
Can I flip a coin?
Pat, you know this. The thing about Caleb that it makes me, I would probably. God, that's a tough one for me. I would love to go with Scott, do the skiff thing.
There's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer, but I'm trying to think of like what would be the downside of both. Like Scott, the downside would be
boring. Scott's boring. Blah blah.
You would have to bring the humor. You would have to bring the humor yourself. Not that he's not fun, but and like I have a sense, and I fish with Scott some, but I have a sense like if I'm trying to fish with Scott, especially if I'm trying to throw a fly, which I can't, I would feel like I was in my economics class at A&M and the teacher is picking apart every little answer that I gave, because Scott would be like, no,
That's
you need
funny.
to do no, you need to do this. On the other hand, the downside with Caleb is I love the back and forth and cutting it up and giving each other a hard time. But Caleb flat out MFs you up one side and down the other, or just totally, demeans
I'm
you.
used to that. I've been fishing that clown too long.
He just like demeans you, like you feel this small when you're even if you do.
It would be too well. You got passive aggressive and aggressive.
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
That's your choices right there.
That's exactly
I've
what it
fished
is.
with Caleb more in the last month than I have in a long time, because he's been back around. We've been doing a few different projects and stuff, and gosh, he will bust your balls. It's funny. I mean, I'll give it back to him just as hard as he'll give it to me, but
oh yeah,
but I mean,
6 or 7 hours of that, you're like, oh man, I need a break. I want somebody to tell me they like me. I
just want somebody to love me.
I just want some love, man.
Yeah, you ain't gonna get it from those two guys.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we're kind of. I want to do one more topic before we do what would Scott do, what would Caleb do. So we're going to go maybe a little bit over.
Scott and Caleb's not here today, so we're going to have a hard time.
Oh, they'll hear about it. I guarantee you that group page is something. So, to answer your question, I'd probably go with Caleb. because I do enjoy giving back, so to speak, as you guys well know. I don't know about this answer. I have my thoughts, but let me start with Dean on this. A listener goes once every couple of months, loves his skiff. Now, I don't know if it's an actual skiff or just a smaller boat or whatever, but he wonders if it's worth it. He says he only goes once every couple of months, always has little issues he has to fix because he doesn't run his boat a lot. So the question becomes, how often should you fish to make getting a boat worthwhile? I don't want to give my answer just yet. What do you say, Dean?
It's to me, that's economics, man. It's like, how much are you spending to look at that boat sitting in the driveway? I tell people, here's the math I give them on that one. You can hire a guide once a month for 12 months out of the year, and you will be ahead of owning a boat.
100%.
Unless you just want the freedom of owning a boat and going where you want to go, because owning a boat is insurance, it's repairs, it's tires, it's lights, it's something that is always going to go wrong. So if you hire a guide, you jump on that boat and you walk away from the headache. I mean, you walk away from the problems of boat ownership. So, I mean, if you feel like you're getting your money's worth out of it, you know, the payment comes every month, the insurance comes every year. And if you're spending that money and you're not getting use out of that boat, you know, or you need a buddy with a boat that's going to take you fishing, and then you don't have to. But man, once a month, if you're fishing once a month, you can.
He said once every couple months.
See, that to me is just, you know, that you're not. I don't think you're getting a return on your investment.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even if you're just going once a month, like Dean was saying, you're going to come out ahead of just hiring a guide, and you got a lot better chance of catching fish as well at that point, because if you're only going out once a month, once every 2 months, it makes it real tough to try and stay on a consistent bite when you're going out there and you have no clue what's going on. But like he said, it has a lot to do with how much you're spending on that boat and economically what it looks like. But for the most part, you're going to come out on top just hiring somebody or having a buddy with the boat. Because it's tough owning a boat and going once every couple of months. It doesn't really add up because stuff's constantly breaking. You need to be running boats.
Yeah. That's the thing. You got to run them.
When you run them every day, they run forever. When they sit, that's things corrode, and then you show up at the ramp in the morning and the battery's dead, or it's a high maintenance operation.
I totally agree with both of you, but I think I'm not going to say I'm going to take the other side, but I think there's value in the other side. What is your level of enjoyment of getting out there on the boat, having the freedom, doing what you want? Do you care? How much do you care about catching fish versus maybe just catching some fish or not catching it at all, and being able to park that boat in your garage or wherever you put it? Like, if you think, my point is, you guys are right. I mean, especially about the maintenance and all that. But if my level of enjoyment is just like so rich, I'll take it. I'll take once every month or once every couple of months,
And that brings a good point. Where does your level of excitement come from fishing? Is it figuring the fish out? That was always my biggest thing. Like, I got so much joy and fulfillment out of going out and figuring it out on my own, not somebody telling me, hey, there are fish over here, or hey, they're doing this, they're doing that. I loved being, from a very young age, I thought it was so awesome to go out there and figure them out yourself, find your own fish, how to catch those fish on a particular lure. And that's where I got my fulfillment out of fishing, was actually figuring the fish out. So I could absolutely see both ways with that, like you said.
Yeah, that is from the moment I started as a boat owner way back when to now. That is my number one enjoyment from fishing. Is like, I figured it out. I look at the tides, I look at the weather, I look at the conditions. I decide what bait is right and all that. And when I get that, and this, Dean, I mean, when I get that first bite, I'm happy. Like, I don't even, of course you want big fish, you want a lot of fish and all that. But when I say nailed it, that whole thing, nailed it. and it's my boat, and every time I've gotten a new boat, it's always a special feeling when you catch your first fish on that new boat and all that. It's just like I did this. You know what I mean, Dean?
Yeah. And if you don't go that often, any fish is a great fish. I mean, hell,
Yeah.
on any day for me, man, that first fish is like, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Jesus. Here we go. At least we got a starting point. But yeah, and then the key word is the freedom. You know, if you own a boat, you have the freedom to hook up to that thing one day and go. And then you're just being outdoors on the water too. Of course, here at the podcast, we put a lot of emphasis on the science, the productivity, and we get deep into subjects. But if you just want to get on a boat, I mean, there is something awesome about just driving a boat across the water, just the fun of cruising across the horizon. It's like I'm the captain today, man. So
until something goes
there's
bad.
there's two sides to that for sure. And then when it's just sitting in your driveway, you know, your neighbors are like, dang, that dude is cool.
Look at that boat.
He's got that boat.
Yeah, look at that boat. All right, what would Dean do, or what would Pat do? I'm looking at this forecast. I mean, the weather has been just about freaking perfect. Getting a little cool on Sunday now. Saturday and Sunday gonna be lows of 49 where I fish and you fish, Dean. A little breezier, but Thursday, Friday, well, Thursday looks pretty yummy. But I don't want to speak for you guys. What would you do, Dean? You're getting into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, into the weekend.
I mean, I'm going to be sticking to the flats, to the same program, the grass beds. The tide is going to be, I mean, none of the weather that's coming is dramatic enough to shift gears for what I've been doing. So 3 feet over the grass beds, swimming paddle tails. I'm still going to go explore the drop-offs. I'm going to take time and, you know, try to be creative and do some stuff. But I mean, until we get temperatures, I mean, we haven't even got close to the 30s. And you say it's like cold, 49. Woo.
Yeah.
49. And that's only going to be for a couple hours in the morning.
Yeah.
And then the sun comes out. So, I mean, from the first week of December to Christmas, even it goes right into New Year's. If we don't get a dramatic cold front, things are going to be very consistent for South Texas.
Man, I've caught some great fish on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. That's always a good day for me to get out.
January when
good,
it changes here. We do consistent through December, but when it hits January, it's going to start getting colder. The water temperatures are going to be, and that's when you shift gears around here in my neighborhood.
Pat?
Yeah, the winds are looking like they're going to be a little bit up, but I'll probably be doing a little bit of both wading and drifting, just depending on how hard that wind actually blows. We'll probably be doing a little bit more wading. You're going to have pre-front there as well. So you see a little, pressure drop. I know everybody talking about pressure.
I mean, I'm with you. You're talking to the right people.
There's definitely be a bite. I'm going to be doing the same things I've been doing, though, wading, and I might mix in a little more of that drifting if I can get out there.
Winds are interesting. Friday and Saturday, kind of south-southwest, at least what I'm looking at. And then Sunday, Dean, it goes northwest. So it's going to be a little flip in the middle of the weekend.
And we have fished through those in the last fronts that have come through. They the fronts haven't been so dramatic that it pushed us off the water for a couple days. So we have fished the day before, the day of the front, which some of those have been pretty sporty. But, you know, I have guys that are a little more adventurous, and we fish through them. And then I have managed to stay pretty consistent through all of the weather changes so far this year. I don't want to jinx myself.
All right, Pat, we always talk.
Something goes wrong.
Yeah, don't do that, because I can't go this week. I'm going to be up at the Army-Navy game, but I'll be there ASAP after that. And I'm going to the Texans game in New York as well. It's going to be pretty fun, but no fishing for me this weekend. Pat, we always talk to our listeners about all the fun they're going to have with our captains, Dean and Scott and Caleb. And I love bragging about you, and it's not bragging if it's true. How can people get a hold of you, want to get in on some of those wades?
Yeah, Pat Gardner on Facebook or Captain Pat Gardner on Instagram. Sometimes I'm terrible with the messaging, so pardon me if I miss you, and I'll get back with you. Or you can reach me direct as well if you got my number. So,
Dean, what's happening in your world these next few days? I know you're going to be back back on the coast
Thursday.
here real soon.
Thursday, I got a wade fishing trip. Friday is drifting. Saturday and Sunday will both probably be drifting. And then Monday of next week, I got a little hunting trip coming up. So,
Not a baby. Not a baby.
so
I love
busy.
it.
I'm just burning up the highway right now, man. I go from Ranzas to Houston to Ranzas
Look who
to
you're
the
talking
range,
to.
back to
Look
the
who you're
yeah.
talking to. I'll go in one
Oh,
day.
well,
I'll go down
yeah,
and
you-
back in one day.
yeah, you're probably going for the record right now.
Yeah, that's what they call a sicko, and I don't care. Happy to do it. All right, boys, that was a lot of fun, man. Pat, thanks for joining us, especially kind of short notice.
Yep.
But always welcome, always great stuff, and real fun show today. So you guys have a great weekend. Going to be good fishing again. It's been good. Have a blast. Catch them up. We will talk to you next time. All right.
Good stuff.
We are
It was
off
a
the
pleasure,
live stream.
Pat. I enjoyed comparing notes with you, man.
absolutely.
That was good.
For sure.
It was lively. It was good. I am kind of pissed about this trip. As cool as it is, Army Navy game's awesome. And they pay the USAA pays for everything: flights, hotels, food, everything.